Hello, everyone, and welcome again to a wonderful, thrilling, entertaining, fantastical, whatever verb, adjective you want to place to our podcast slash video slash YouTube entertainment today. But again, welcome to Three Wells, where we're all about live well, be well, and do well. And today we have a very special guest with us. Ernest told me he wants to do the promo intro today. So I'm going to pass the baton to my everlasting and wonderful co-host. By the way, full disclosure, we were talking right before this podcast, and Ernest had this wonderful game show host voice. So I wonder if he's going to do it again now. But anyway, Ernest, go ahead, fire away.
Absolutely. You keep egging me on. So here it goes. So we're excited. Parenting, huge topic. And as more of the country and the world turns to legalizing marijuana, many parents are also turning to their relationship with alcohol and wondering where cannabis fits in. With us today is someone that knows a thing or two about cannabis and the transition from wine mom to weed mom. Danielle Simone Brand, the author of the book, Weed Mom, The Canna-Curious Guide to Healthier Relaxation, Happier Parenting, and Chilling the F Out. Danielle, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Awesome. I think I nailed the NPR-esque intro there, but
yeah, you know what, Ernest, I got to say, anyone who thinks Ernest came out with a rock solid NPR or game show host voice, make comments below. I got to hear what people think because I love it. It's great, Ernest.
And it'll keep getting week over week. We'll keep adding to it, but. Danielle, one of the big questions on everyone's mind, especially with the pandemic, especially spending, I guess it's been a year and a half, it feels like, of at home with kids, a lot of legalization everywhere. How did this relationship, or how did cannabis start for you? Where was the beginning block where you said, you know what, I think it's time to switch the Pinot Grigio in the cup to maybe looking at cannabis?
Yeah, so for me, it started several years ago, and I was in my late 30s already and a mother of two, and had my job and my career, and it really wasn't on my radar. I would say that cannabis was like the furthest thing from my mind in terms of like what I needed. And I started getting some assignments as a freelance writer on cannabis, and at the same time, where we were living in California, legalization, I had voted for legalization in November 2016. And then in 2018, it went into effect in January. And I started just noticing a lot more information about cannabis out there and a lot more people talking about it. And the buzz was increasing. And like I said, I was getting assignments to write about it. And so I said, I need to discover this for myself. I need to figure out whether this is something that works for me. Is it something that, is associated with my stoner stereotypes of couch locked, sitting around taking bong rips and not doing anything else? Or, does it promote creativity and focus and presence and better sleep and all these things that people were telling me about? So I'm an experimenter. I have to find out for myself. I got a super low dose vape pen, very simple, very, easy entry, and got on my yoga mat. And I was a yoga teacher for many years. And so I decided, this is the testing ground, the proving ground for me on this mat. I took a single puff, and then I had a beautiful experience. I had something really deeply embodied and transcendent at the same time, if that makes sense. I felt fully present, fully aware, and elevated, able to connect on a higher plane. And oh my gosh, like I was a convert. And so from there, it was just I say in the book, it's a hop, skip, and a jump for me down cannabis lane. And I started learning everything and trying everything, and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, and what other moms that in my community wanted, and the kind of information they wanted. So that's how I began this journey.
What was the education journey there? Because Jason, maybe you can ring to this, and as you're going through it, we hear a lot from people who say, I go online, there's all this mixed stuff. The last guy that ever gave me any cannabis information, especially if I don't live in a legal state, was the guy who's, living down the street and randomly bumps into me, and I pretend I don't know him at the grocery store, but he knows a thing or two about cannabis. So what was that journey like? What did you experience any frustrations finding information about cannabis?
Sure. There's a lot of information online, and not all of it is accurate, as we all know. about any subject, right?
Yeah.
Not just
Oh,
cannabis.
yeah.
And so, I went to some of the, the well-known sites like, Leafly was helpful for me, and, lots of news sites. I was looking at Marijuana Moment, and I was writing for Civilized. So I was, getting some information there too. But, certainly talking to people helped me a lot, speaking with bud tenders, and I was in a legal state, obviously. So I had that access. But, I also found that in many ways it was the Wild West of cannabis education, and, still just so many quarters and pockets saying their own things, and not necessarily a cohesive narrative, and particularly for moms. And that is one reason I wrote the book, because I felt like there needs to be a comprehensive resource, in one place, a starter guide, basically, not just to how to consume, but also to how to talk about this. Like, we're in a changing moment culturally where we're going to have to start talking more and more to kids, partners, parents, friends, etc. So, so yeah, that's what I noticed. And I think that cannabis education is improving, hour by hour, really, in terms of what's available on the internet, podcasts, lots of really interesting podcasts in cannabis right now, and also cannabis education programs, cannabis universities. But for your average everyday consumer, I think there's still some confusion.
So I'm going to assume that you started your journey before Three Wells was in existence, because you didn't see us. But knowing that we're out there now, threewells.co, I'm sure you'd go to, right? I'm putting words in your mouth on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cannabis education I think it takes a lot of people speaking to a lot of different audiences. And, and I love what you're doing. You're trying to elevate the conversation and, really bring it into present day, the issues that we deal with today, and from from that elevated perspective. So yeah, for sure.
Okay. Sorry to interject there. Ernest, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, go ahead, Jason. I think I cut you off earlier. You had one.
Yeah, no worries. So, your book, it's all about the cannabis mom, and I'm curious why you took that perspective in the book. Like, what was it? Hey, as a mom, I've got to get this message out, and I've got to help people, and all the wonderful things you wrote about in the book. Why that perspective? What did you feel like was missing?
Well, one reason, of course, being that I'm a mom, and I have a lot of moms in my community. Most of my friends are women who are moms. And people started coming to me, honestly, with their questions. Once I became known as a canna mom in my community, it became obvious that I was writing about cannabis a lot. I would get questions on the playground, literally, like, sitting in the shade watching my kids. Yeah, sitting in the shade watching my kids in the playground. And, mom would come up to me and say, hey, can you talk to me about CBD for anxiety? Or, what's the difference between indica and sativa? And, these were conversations that were super fun for me to have. And they were coming to me like over and over and over, both in person and online. And I realized, there's a real interest in this, but also some, reticence because of the long time sort of stoner stigmas that are still around. And so, yeah, I noticed, and also personally, as a mom, cannabis helps me tremendously. And I know that other moms are going through similar things, difficulties with sleep, wanting to regulate mood a little bit better in those difficult parenting moments, needing relief from minor pain, wanting to connect better with a partner and experience, either less pain or more enjoyment with sex. These are things that moms often deal with. So I knew that cannabis could help if moms were aware enough and if the stigma was lessened enough. And then speaking to stigma, I think that, moms in particular are judged for moral failings or perceived moral failings, right? And so I think it's an area that is particularly ripe to sort of unpack those stigmas.
So I know, let's stay with stigma for a second. Actually, this is more of a perception than stigma. So many people have this perception that, you smoke a joint, eat an edible, whatever, and you're despondent, right? You don't pay attention, you're lethargic, you don't care. And as a parent, I'm a parent as well. I mean, those are exactly the things you can't and don't want to be as a good parent. But let's talk about that perception or misconception of that in reality. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. So my experience with cannabis is that it's extremely dose dependent, right? And also, mode of intake dependent and, type of product dependent. So, if I get super high out of my mind, I'm not going to be able to parent well. And I wouldn't do that. That's an irresponsible, and my kids would notice, and that's not the way that I parent. But microdosing or moderate dosing depends on your tolerance, obviously. It helps me tune in. It does the opposite. Instead of tuning out and getting spacey and forgetting what I just said 3 seconds ago, it helps me tune in. It helps me pay attention. It helps me really listen to my kids when they're going on and on about Minecraft or things that I wouldn't really research on my own, let's say. So for me, it's very much about the dose and the product, but also the intention of how I take it. For me, it's not just like, oh, it's 4:20 or it's the right time, so I'm gonna toke up or whatever. It's about like, I want to consciously shift my mindset at this point. I'm going to take a few moments to myself, sit outside in nature if I can, and make it a conscious choice.
So is it fair to liken it to, you sit down and have one glass of wine, or you don't get drunk. It's akin to that, and having that little break in your day is okay with cannabis, like you would think it was okay for a glass of wine. Would you make that correlation?
Well, I think the alcohol and cannabis comparison, it's a good one because a lot of people can wrap their minds around it, but it definitely doesn't get to the whole of what cannabis is, in my life, the role that it plays in my life. Absolutely, it's a way to shift mood, wind down, relax, de-stress. Like, those are ways that people might use wine less effectively, I might say, because, wine spikes our cortisol and sugar cravings and makes it harder to sleep, all that kind of stuff. So I think that cannabis is the healthier alternative if you're going to look at it that way. But cannabis is so much more to me than just a replacement for alcohol. For me, it's really about well-being, overall well-being, tuning in. It helps me see the spiritual side of things when that's my intention. It helps me, deeply enjoy being out in nature, and just that sensitivity and that attunement to the present moment is something that cannabis gives me, that enhances my well-being in a way that alcohol never did.
So we're not gonna get too much into the whole physiology, biochemical, blah blah blah, but the one thing I think is important for everyone listening to know is that if you look at alcohol, and I enjoy a glass of wine like most others do. So I'm not down on alcohol at all. Moderate use of anything, cannabis, wine, whatever. But I think it's important for those that they're canna curious and maybe not canna aficionados. That if you look at alcohol and you touch on the amount of sugar, how it interacts or reacts with your body, and all the other things that can be inside of alcohol, it really doesn't. It's not as compatible physiologically as cannabis is. And I'm not trying to tout one over the other. It's just it's the medical reality, right? So I look at it like, hey, we have an endocannabinoid system, and you can look up ECS or endocannabinoid system on 3wells.co, and we talk about. We don't have to get into the details here, but it's a system that's in our body that actually needs cannabinoids, and cannabinoids are present in cannabis, as we all know. And for me, the big thing is, it seems so much more natural to turn to cannabis and to use cannabis than alcohol. And again, I'm not trying to put one down, but one has a definite leg up. Cannabis has a leg up in uncompatibility with our bodies versus alcohol. So would you agree with that perception? And is that one of your motivations? It is mine, and I'm curious what yours is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I spoke with a cannabis nurse named Sherry Tutkus for my book, and you may know her. She's great. She's really out there in the cannabis world, and she likes to say alcohol is toxic to all of our organ systems, and cannabis isn't. I mean, you just said you don't want to rag on alcohol, but
hey, if the nurse said it though, she can say it. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, these are facts, and I wrote a Dear Alcohol, I'm Breaking Up With You letter in the book. That is true. But I will still have an occasional glass of wine because I enjoy the taste, and, it's fun, but I don't feel good afterward. I am very aware of the fact that I feel worse rather than better after using alcohol. Whereas with cannabis, I don't, unless I've overused, which is really rare for me because I've calibrated, what my sweet spot is. I feel better afterwards, and I feel healthier with it in my life. So absolutely, that the suite of health benefits versus the suite of ill effects, for alcohol, that it plays a big role for me.
Yeah, we could get into a whole discussion about beyond the relaxation, et cetera, when you start getting into CBD and whatnot. But we'll hold on that because that could take us into a day-long conversation. But I'm really anxious to bring it back to the core of your book as being a parent, and the role cannabis plays in your life, the role or how that becomes part of your kids' lives, and I don't mean that by giving it to them. Let's just be crystal clear. No one should give cannabis to kids. There's a good argument for not taking cannabis before you're 21, but again, that can be a moral and a biological discussion we won't get into. But what I'm really curious about, because as a parent, and I think a lot of people would wonder, is how do you bring it up? And or do you just allow your kids to see it and then they ask about, like, how does someone as a parent deal with kids of different ages? And I know your kids are 8, 11, mine's 18, and there's different stages and in communication, but really, how do you bring it up and talk to them and make it part of your life and their life? Because you're their parent, they're going to see things and see you, and they need to understand. So that was a very long question. But I wanted to make sure I was articulating, so I over-articulated. But take it away, Danielle, please. Save us all.
Yeah. Well, it's really, really important, I think, to normalize cannabis, to normalize responsible cannabis use. And that's going to look different for different families, depending on how big a role it plays in your life in general. I think that parents who are medicating, with cannabis, and it's a big part of their everyday lives and they need to use it, and it's going to be evident to their kids, they're going to have that conversation maybe earlier or in a different way than parents who are using it recreationally, just for fun occasionally, just on Saturday night after the kids are asleep. So it really does vary. I spoke to my kids early because I was starting to write about cannabis, and I also knew that any of their parents' friends could Google my name, and within 0.36 seconds, they come up with cannabis. So, I feel that it's important to get out in front of the conversation, both so that my kids understand what's going on and that, they're prepared if, somebody makes a comment out in the world. But, that being said, I think it varies so much based on, where you live, the legal situation, of your state, how you talk to kids is, it varies based on how old they are and their responsibility and maturity and all sorts of things. But generally speaking, I think the message is, to varying complexities, depending on their age, it's a plant. It grows in the ground. You can show them pictures or even show them a plant if that's accessible. No one's going to get high from touching a leaf of a cannabis plant. So, I feel like those are good ways to connect it to concrete things they know in the world. They know that plants grow in the ground, and, with my kids, we garden, and we're part of that life cycle. So it's a plant. It's something that some adults use for medicine and some adults use for relaxation, or mood enhancing, whatever you want to call it. And some people use it for both. Many women that I interviewed for the book used it for both, actually. In some ways, they were using cannabis for medicine and, to enjoy themselves. So I do make those points clear. I say that cannabis isn't for kids' brains unless they're specifically, medicating under a doctor's care for a particular condition. And my kids, are fortunately very healthy. And so the only thing we use for them is topical CBD every once in a while if they've got, a bruise or something. And, when they get older, when they get to be teens, there's another conversation that for me revolves around harm reduction and education and letting them know, hey, it's maybe not a good idea to use this heavily when you're a teen, but you might experiment, and here's what you should know if you do. That's my perspective, at least.
Are there any, after you talk to your kids, are there any key points that you thought, wow, that one really stuck with them and it resonated well? And then conversely, was there anything that you say like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have phrased it that way or said that?
Well, that's interesting. Nothing really landed poorly with my kids because they hadn't heard many stigmas out in the world yet. They didn't have any preconceived notions. So it was just like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Mama likes it and she keeps it in her locked container and it smells kind of weird, but whatever. For them, there wasn't anything to unlearn. Thankfully, they hadn't, gone through any sort of prohibitionist program at school yet, any dare or just say no or, anything like that yet. And so I feel really fortunate. I was able to just start this conversation in a really normal, everyday kind of way. But I should say that it's a continuing conversation because they absorbed some of it the first time. And then, a few months later, I was like, hey, let's just chat about cannabis again. And they had forgotten most of it. So it's this, constant like refreshing and
way to have an impact, Danielle.
Yeah, seriously. they're like, oh yeah, right. We did talk about that. I don't know.
Hey, I feel like that every time I talk to my son. It doesn't matter what I've said. I have zero impact.
It's a slow process of normalizing, just like, other hard conversations or quote unquote hard conversations with kids. Like, sex education is not a one and done kind of conversation. The same applies to just so many things in our lives that we need to be educated about in order to do mindfully and healthfully. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah. It's funny, the impact and then it's a conversation, not a point in time, diatribe of thoughts and feelings. So the one thing I noticed with my son, and I'm curious if you notice this too, these types of conversations, right? Whether it be cannabis, alcohol, sex, harder drugs, I found the more matter of fact I was and less emotional and subjective and opinionated I was, the better it resonated with him. And I don't know if it was the tone in my voice or that it just made sense because it's factual and not, laden with emotion that may be out of control. But I found when I talked to my son, it was, hey, this is like this is a plant. This is what it does. Here are the benefits. Here are some of the drawbacks. And then we had that conversation. And then it was like a year or two later, we had a conversation about alcohol. And this is when he was younger. So I just wanted him to know what was going on. And he sees bottles of wine or rum or something and so he sees that around. We had to have that conversation. But when I said to him, hey, here's what happens in your body when you take cannabis, and here's what happens in your body when you take alcohol, he kind of got it. I didn't have to go into great detail. He says, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then as he got now, he's 18, I've had that alcohol discussion with him. And I said to him, hey, look, my simple philosophy in life is if Mother Nature didn't make it, I don't take it. And so, if it's chemical drugs or, distilled spirits, sure, I'll have a little bit, but I, very much in moderation. And I said, you cannot overdose and you cannot get alcohol poisoning. You cannot, do severe damage to your body with cannabis. Sure, if you really want to go crazy, you're going to do some lung damage if you smoke it, but you would have to, inhale bags of it and you'd pass out before that. But I said, consider that when you're thinking about alcohol versus drugs. And that seemed to really hit home with him. Now, I'm curious, as someone who has much more experience with talking to kids, and you've written a book and you've thought about it much more deeply than I have, guaranteed. What are your thoughts on everything I just said and how I approached it with my son? And maybe there's learnings in there for others that may be mistakes I made.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I've ever spoken to my kids about something important to me without a lot of emotion because
I'm an automaton.
No, I think I'm a passionate advocate. And so, and I want to show and convince at the same time, and maybe to my detriment sometimes. I think I could be more objective at points. So, I think it really does depend on you as a parent and your relationship with your kids. But absolutely comparing the objective facts of how alcohol affects one's body, versus how cannabis does, the fact that you cannot, die of a cannabis overdose. That's not a thing. You'd have to consume like unreal amounts, of cannabis to suppress, it doesn't happen. But as we know, alcohol can be really dangerous, and you can die from alcohol poisoning. Absolutely. So, that makes a whole lot of sense. And especially for, I think, teens who are able to, at least to some degree, weigh pros and cons and, and make decisions that way. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think for me, it's facts and passion at the same time. I can't do it one way with only one.
Well, I guess you're living proof it can work either way. The automaton way, which is me, or the more human impassioned way, which is you.
Well, Jason, there's a reason why she has a book.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't. Yeah.
That's right.
Thanks for rubbing that in, Ernest. Thanks, man.
Just wanted to remind you. Just kidding.
No, I think that there's room for a lot of different ways to talk about it. And, absolutely being just being a reliable source of information, like that's important, because if we're not reliable, we don't provide them facts, they're not going to trust us, and they won't trust us about cannabis, alcohol, other drugs, all the other things that, we worry about with kids. So, be that reliable resource. I think that's great.
In that same vein, how do you get your partner, spouse, husband, wife, whatever it may be, to kind of be on the same page? Because I think, you kind of talked about it earlier, right? Being the canna mom, and everybody knows to go to you, and you've got all this information. But I'm curious, in those conversations, did you ever feel as though, maybe that person, they're there, but their partner would say no, or there was all this hesitation because of that other side or other part of their life?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I have a whole chapter on talking to partners about cannabis. And I also tell the story in the book of my own, sort of up and down relationship with cannabis vis-a-vis my husband, who long ago used to overuse cannabis. And that's one reason I didn't like it. And I didn't use it myself, because I saw him, leaning on it pretty heavily for mental health, basically, without a lot of awareness around, how around different cannabinoids and their different effects, terpenes, et cetera. So I guess my point there is that that conversation has been really important to me, and that's why I wrote a chapter about it. And it varies so much based on the individual situation, because I've spoken to moms, for instance, who would love to try cannabis, but their husband is in law enforcement, let's say, and they're in a non-legal state. There's just no possibility for them yet. They can try CBD, they can try, low to no THC products, but, so it really does depend. But I do think that, just like with what you were saying with kids, that presenting the facts, talking about it in a more objective way, but then also bringing it home personally to say, this is how I think it could help me, right? Not like, I just want to take a bong rip and hang out on the couch and watch Netflix for this week, but but it could actually, low doses could help me sleep better, and therefore be more patient with the kids the next morning. Low doses of cannabis could help me relax with that wine on Friday and Saturday nights and wake up, in a healthier state. Low doses of cannabis or moderate doses could help with pain, migraines, menstrual cramps, things like that. So if you really bring it home and talk to your partner about the ways that you think it could specifically help you, and the fact that, legalization is progressing so rapidly in all of these states, we are on this trajectory toward greater acceptance. And I think that just opening up that conversation, and sometimes that conversation starts just with CBD, because, it's just a more palatable, easier entry, I think, for a lot of people, because they're afraid of the high, and CBD doesn't get you high. Does that help?
No, absolutely. I've got a lot of friends in the 30 to 40 bracket, younger children, who are just kind of saying, hey, we had a lot of fun with this past few years. I feel very awkward because my wife or my husband, they were very straight edge, very against this. I'm doing it in secret. Or I think you had a line in there where you were like, I'm Googling to see where the legal dispensaries are and making sure my husband doesn't see this. That's kind of the same feeling that they're going through. So it's good to hear kind of that perspective. But, what would you suggest, or what do you recommend for those that are just, facts just don't break through? And you've got a lot of these, you might have some folks that are very, very conservative from a perspective of religion and aren't introduced to this, or you've got some very closed-minded partners. How do you what are some of the more extreme measures you think that would help kind of get that conversation started?
Extreme measures, huh?
Maybe extreme. Maybe
like tying them up.
Too extreme. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how far do you want to go with this?
Little Clockwork Orange, Ernest. Are you going there?
Yeah. We'll rent a room, make them watch Cannabis Education for 9 hours and see what happens.
Right.
Provide
exactly.
Snacks. Yeah.
Yeah. The opposite of reefer madness, but propaganda. Well, reading my book could be helpful, I think, because I do present that sort of overall, that cultural context of like how we're changing, how we're moving, how we're progressing forward, and how, cannabis is not some big scary monster that's coming to get our communities. It's, it's, used mindfully, used responsibly. Like the sky has not fallen in any of the places that have legalized, right? So we can, there are numerous facts that we can compile, but I mean, ultimately, I also am a believer that adults get to make their own choices, right? And you can speak something, talk it through with your partner. And if they're not comfortable with it, then, you would, take certain precautions, obviously. Maybe experimenting for the first time when you don't have any responsibilities to children. That's important, if your partner is worried. But, I think that I want to empower women in particular to make their own choices and decide whether this is something good for them or not, even if other people in their life aren't necessarily on board yet.
Hey, sorry, Ernest, I was going to go to another subject here. I want to actually come back to something that we touched on, but we didn't get into too much detail, because I know in your book you have a chart, and it's all about modalities, ways to take cannabis consumption. And you have this, I'm trying to go from memory, but you have down the left, there's all the different ways you can take it, and then onset and a brief description, etc. Quantity. That's the crux of my question, because you said something at the outset of our talk where the first time you got your yoga mat out, you sat down and you took a draw, and it was great. What I hear time and time again, is more so with edibles than smoking, is they take way too much, and I have some people who remain nameless in my life that didn't listen to me and ended up taking 40 milligrams of THC in 20 minutes and had the worst experience ever. And sure, that's a big "I told you so." It tainted them, unfortunately. And so then I had to sit with them and show them, and then they had a great experience. So do you have, and we're not trying to prescribe anything to anyone, talk to your doctor, all that disclaimer, because we are not doctors. But in general, for you, when it comes to the THC side, CBD is different because you're not going to, get the hallucinogenic side of things. But do you have an amount that you try to say, hey, this is where a good place to start is, and maybe go as high as this?
Yeah, so I do have some dosing guidelines in the book, and definitely all the disclaimers you said, just to, they apply. I'm not, giving individualized advice to anybody, but I would say that between, if it's an edible or, drinkable, something ingestible, anywhere between 1 milligram and 5 milligrams can be a good first microdose or, small dose to see how it affects you. I have actually heard people say that 5 milligrams made them anxious and it was too much. So if they know, if someone knows that they have a sensitive system or they're particularly worried about it, I would start so low. 1 milligram of THC sounds like nothing to people maybe who, are experienced with cannabis. But, I don't want to, I can't stress enough that starting low and going slow is so much better and smarter and, a much better introduction to cannabis than starting with even 10 milligrams or 20 or 40, like you mentioned. So it takes a bit of patience. You have to calibrate a little bit to get to your sweet spot. But if you start super low and only stick with that amount for that session, for that day, don't go adding on, eating more after half an hour. People do that, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Because they think, oh, it hasn't hit me. I don't know what this is. Okay, let's take another one. So, starting super, super low. And then if it's like something inhaled, I would say that for brand new people, kind of curious newbies, that, that vapor tincture is nice because you can really just go very, very low, one puff of a vape, or half even. And with that, since inhalation has a quicker onset time than edibles do, you can wait maybe just 5 minutes, see how it affects you. And if you want, to elevate a little bit more, you can continue. But yeah, the dosing guidelines in my book are super conservative. I don't use that word very often when I speak of myself, but conservative in the sense that I just don't want people to overdo it.
Yeah, those are wise words, because I'll give you a case in point. Someone in my life, and I'm careful not to mention names just because they haven't given me permission or my relationship with them, but they're 73 years old and started within just a year ago, started taking cannabis for sleep. And they went through the, starting low and they started at 2 milligrams. And I didn't say anything, but in my head, I'm thinking, wow, that's so low. But they got a good night's sleep, and then they tried to titrate up thinking, oh, I get an even deeper sleep. And they went to 5 milligrams for 3 nights and had horrific nightmares and didn't get good sleep. And as soon as they went back to 2, just that tiny bit of 3 milligrams made a world of difference. As soon as they went back to 2, life was good again. They had good sleeps. So yeah, and this is not a competition. I think what happens is we slip back into our teen mode. And we're like, oh, I can drink more than the other person, or I can take more cannabis than the other. No, we're well past that now. As parents, we got to set a good example. So, but tell you about parents. Oh, Ernest, you look like you're on the edge for a question.
No, I was just going to say that's one of the problems, but I think the other problem is the fact that a lot of these products, especially from edibles, from the chocolate ranges that most manufacturers are putting out, they're actually delicious. I mean, they're gourmet chocolate. It's very hard, right? You've got to, at least what I do is I have a little bit, then I hide the rest for myself because I'm like, wow, that was way better than what I just picked up even at Whole Foods. So I don't know what's going on here, but this was great. That's the other problem.
Yes, there's that temptation. And I would say actually for Jason, when you mentioned an older person in your life, absolutely, cannabis can affect older people very differently. Their metabolism is slower, and so it can be more powerful. And that's, absolutely, that makes sense to me that 2 milligrams was their sweet spot, even though it seems like very, very low for others.
And you raise a good point on age too. I mean, even when you're, 40, 50, 60 plus, at different points in your life, your metabolic rate and your body's reaction are going to change. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to take 2 milligrams for the rest of my life. No, you may need to go up or down. So you really have to listen. And I think that's a big failure on a lot of our parts, is that we don't listen to our body. We just sort of put the mechanics in and say, do this, thou shalt bend. And our bodies don't. They're stronger than we are. And I don't mean to separate our bodies from our beings, but sometimes you need to. But let's come back to parenting, but I want to flip the script. And I'm curious, have you had to talk to your parents, or, did your spouse have to talk to their parents about cannabis use? And if you did, how did that go? And what did you say? Because I'm really curious. I've had that discussion myself, and I'm very curious on how you handled it versus how I handled it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I am lucky enough that my dad owns a natural food store in southern Indiana, where I was born but never lived. And we lived in Hawaii for a lot of the years that I was growing up, and then he moved back to Indiana. So he has been well familiarized with CBD for many years, and he introduced me to CBD. So so I actually, my first opening into that cannabis door, the non-psychoactive part of the cannabis door, was through CBD through my dad, and he sent it to both me and my husband for help with sleep and anxiety, and I was pleased with the results. But as you know, my story continued to include THC as well, which is something that my dad was probably less enthusiastic about and a little more worried about, given just everything, given my husband's past with it, given the fact that I'm a mom and have a lot of responsibilities. So it was a slow conversation. It was more like, hey, I'm writing about this subject more. That's kind of interesting, huh? Hey, I tried it. What do you think about that? So it was like, I think it was like the frog in the pot of water. Like I very, very slowly introduced my parents to the fact that cannabis was becoming a bigger part of my life. And they were pretty open to it, pretty amenable to it. My mom grew up in Hawaii and was, sort of a quasi hippie, I guess, there. And she really never was into cannabis, never experimented much on her own, but didn't have a lot of stigmas necessarily beyond the like, oh, it's just going to make you tired and couch locked kind of thing. And once I was able to educate her on that, and that's not the fact, and actually there are strains and modes of intake and whatever where I can jump up and do everything I need to do with tons of energy and focus. I think once I was able to convey the whole spectrum of the experience and the subtleties of it, they were both pretty open, I have to say. Fortunately. How did it go for you?
It was interesting. My mom, my dad's passed away, but my mom is a pretty open-minded person, but I think it was a hard gear to change at first, meaning, so she was a hippie and I knew that. And, my dad actually sold cannabis out of the trunk of his 58, I think it was, Cadillac. So it wasn't, my mom is not, sheltered or innocent in many ways. But, as a parent, we protect our kids and we say, don't do drugs. And cannabis got lumped in that, as we all know, reefer madness and all the insanity that ensued around that. But so I think that she successfully made the change. But when I first started talking to her, I think that maternal sort of more instinctual thing, or maybe just the sheer repetition of saying no drugs, I could see it was kind of, But to her credit, she got over it quickly. But I think I'm fortunate because I have friends and colleagues who've had that discussion about, whether they're at 3 wells or they're just starting to take cannabis. That conversation doesn't go as well. It's the parent immediately goes to, oh, you're going to become a stoner. You're going to burn out. You're going to sit on the couch. You're going to be, no productivity. You're going to let your family down. All of these things start to go on. And some have had more success than others. Like there are some immovable perceptions in some people, but I would say the thing that worked for me, and I think that works the most from all the people I've talked to that have had this discussion, is just being, well educated about it, so that you can combat those objections, right? Like becoming a stoner. Well, no, actually, cigarettes, alcohol, and opioids are 10 times more addictive than cannabis. So would you have the same addictive precautions and concerns? And then, so that helps. And then the whole, how you take it, how much you take it. If I find that the more educated you are before the conversation, and that when you can present facts in a very clear way, then it helps the whole conversation. And that happened with my mom too. And like I said, I think I got off easy compared to most, but it ended well. And, she's a big advocate of it, and she'll take a little bit for a variety of things now. Ernest, have you talked to your parents?
I have. So kind of interesting. I come from a very, very European household. I'm actually off the boat from Croatia. So as you can imagine, my parents are very traditional in the European sense of the way. And cannabis is one of those things. I think if I think about telling my father or asking about cannabis, I think the response would be like, if the police show up, you're probably going to be dead or something. It's a very, very, very tough, sticky conversation. But eventually, I think when I kind of started, I did the same thing you did, Danielle, really kind of bringing it very slowly, the boiling frog, so to speak, just kind of bringing up little by little and bringing up the facts. And I'm the same way, very passionate about this topic. I think my mother saw it more than my father. I think my father was like, things could be worse. But understanding that I'm a functional person and I've been, consuming cannabis and being functional for this many years, I was like, oh, wow. So, okay. As long as you're employed and can keep yourself together, I guess we don't care. So that's how that conversation went, Jason. And for those of you wondering, the Cadillac that Jason mentioned earlier, that's a very big trunk. That's a big car. So.
Wow. Way to put a fine point on that one.
Yeah.
Bags and bags of cannabis in the trunk of that Cadillac.
Yeah. I'm sure.
I'm sure the statute of limitations has run out.
Yeah, exactly. Although they might come after me, who knows? So Danielle, author, writer, mom, Canna genius, whatever label you want to put. But to repeat, your book, Weed Mom, the Canna Curious Woman's Guide to Healthier Relaxation, Happier Parenting, and Chilling the F Out. Okay, I said that, Ernest. Did I channel your whole game show host voice reasonably well?
You did a great job.
Okay. Danielle, any parting things you want to share with us before we ask you the 3 questions that Ernest always likes to ask at the end?
Oh, 3 questions. Let's see. I just want people to know out there that, cannabis is, like I said earlier, it's not a big scary monster coming to get us. It's something that we can really integrate into our lives in a healthy way. As long as people understand it, that's the big thing. The more people know about cannabis, the less they hate it. And sometimes the more they actually love it, like me, and frequently actually. So, I want to emphasize for all the newbies or canna curious people out there that, consuming cannabis responsibly and being the person you're meant to be in this world are totally compatible. Whether you're a parent, a partner, employee, business owner, doing your work out in the world, cannabis can support and help you. And, it's a wonderful healing plant. And that's really, I love this plant, and that's why I wrote the book.
That's great. So, book. Where can people get Weed Mom, the Canna Curious Guide? Wow. Ernest, I have just failed the game show host test, man.
You did. So as we all want to know, so Weed Mom, the Canna Curious Guide to Healthier Relaxation, Happier Parenting, and Chilling the F Out. I know it's available on Amazon, a few places. Danielle, could you give us a rundown how we can find it, where to go, how do we purchase it, how do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. My book can be found on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, Powell's, any place online that sells books will have my book. You can also pick it up in your local bookstore or ask them to carry it, because that's a wonderful thing to support your local businesses and support authors at the same time. And if anyone wants to find me in particular, I'm most active around my book on Instagram, and that's at Danielle Simone Brand.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay, Ernest.
Right.
Big 3.
Transition. This is the part of the show that we like to have fun with, but these are going to be just 3 very quick, fun questions about you, something related to cannabis, maybe something not related to cannabis. But we didn't prepare Danielle for these, so all of this is very raw. So first and foremost, what is the funniest cannabis myth you've heard?
Ooh. Funniest
or weirdest. I mean, it doesn't matter. Just we're trying to find the wackiest cannabis myth I guess you've heard, because I know you probably run into some stereotypes that are floating around here.
I've seen some graphics of supposedly real anti-cannabis propaganda that shows like the tiniest amount of flower, like this much, like one hit, and it says something like, this contains enough cannabis to like give you a heart attack, or something like really, really insane, or this cannabis has enough milligrams of THC in it to like knock you out for days. Like, it's completely over the top. I don't know if it's actually even real, but people think that with higher potency products, like that means flower is all of a sudden super dangerous.
Yeah, I think I've seen that one floating around. At least I'm a member of a few like senior community groups on Facebook, and don't ask me why or how I got in there, but I did. We work with a few different generations of older adults in cannabis, but there was one that was like, if you thought Viagra was bad, this is a lot worse. It could give you a heart attack. And I'm like, wow, this is a really wacky meme, but who knows what's out there on Facebook. So I've seen that one definitely float around. Okay, we'll jump into the second question. What's your top favorite product right now? What kind of product is it, and why is it your favorite cannabis product?
Ooh, favorite. Gosh, I can't do a favorite, but but I love flower. I love, handling flower and all of its, aromatic wonderfulness. And to me, like, it's plant medicine. Even if I'm using it for fun, it's also plant medicine. So my favorite strains these days, I love lemon kush. I like banana mac. Sour diesel is a big go-to for me. Been enjoying Delta 8 as well as like a new thing to try. I know there's a lot of buzz right now around this new cannabinoid, not new, but newly being marketed. And I'm enjoying with Delta 8 that more clear-headed feeling than I typically have with Delta 9 THC. So that's nice. Also loving this Ojai Energetics CBD oil that's mixed with, I think, morello cherry. And it's a nice elixir that gives me a little zen in the middle of the day.
I'm gonna have to check those out. The cherry one sounds really good, and I'm gonna we'll grab the links and the descriptions of those products because those sound awesome. Cool. Okay. And the last one, things that your kids said either recently or whenever that were way funnier with an edible.
It took you a whole year to write a book.
Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, they knocked those out in an afternoon. So, it took me a whole year.
That's a good one. That's a Bart Simpson Homer strangling moment, right?
Totally. That was a good one.
Yeah, and that's a wrap on our 3 questions there. So,
all right.
Yeah, those were fun.
Oh,
Danielle,
thank you.
It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And I encourage everyone to get out, grab the book. It's a great read. And we'll put the links below to get it. And hopefully we'll talk soon again, Danielle. So again, thank you very much for your time and sharing with us all.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Danielle.